Okay, so I'm doing a bad job starting because I wasn't ready, but I think it'll be okay.
Yeah, it'll be perfect.
Okay. Today, I'm talking with my dear friend, Ladan Osman, whose video recording, poetry reading we just watched. And I want to give just a brief intro to Ladan and her work. Ladan Osman is a Somali-born artist whose work is a lyric and exegetic response to problems of race, gender, displacement, and colonialism. She is the author of Exiles of Eden, recently out from Coffee House Press in 2019. The Kitchen Dweller's Testimony came out in 2015 from the University of Nebraska Press, winner of the Sillerman First Book Prize, and the chapbook Ordinary Heaven, which appeared in the box set 7 New Generation African Poets from Slappering Hole Press, 2014. She has received fellowships from the Fine Arts Work Center, Cave Canem, Lumen Arts Foundation, and the Michener Center for Writers, among other awards. And her work has appeared in numerous publications and been translated into over 10 languages. She lives in Brooklyn. Hello, my friend. I'm so happy to be in conversation with you today.
Yeah, me too. Thanks, Donika.
So thank you for the reading, which was beautiful. And I think I just want to jump in with my questions.
Okay.
And my first question is a pretty basic one, and I imagine it's one that many people are wondering about right now, and that is the importance. What is the importance of art and poetry in this really historic time where one of the foundational conditions is that we are farther apart from each other necessarily to try to keep each other safe, right? So what do art and poetry in particular, what does that do for us right now?
I think what art can do is offer another story and another world, even if it is functioning with all the problems of this one. Because, I mean, I think in a lot of my poems, even if it looks like a love poem or I'm talking about a beetle or something, I am still worried about the state, and I'm still worried about disastrous stories and how easy it is to become contained, right, by a small story. Not just that it's an escape, but it's a way to soothe. It gives me the opportunity to self-soothe because I can look at the art, I can critique it, I can apply it to my own practice. I can think about some of these situations playing out in the world around us, especially as we're isolated. It means something different to watch a party scene or to watch a romance unfold or to watch even a war scene, because there are so many things that are being altered in real time right now. And so I think for me, it reminds me of my humanity and of all the things that we're doing right, but also some of the things that we're doing wrong, all the things that we don't need and can dispose of, like war, like, you know, all these other kinds of aggression and the types of gatherings that are not useful. And I would like to think too that all of the people that are being called essential workers, and they are essential workers and emergency workers, but that are still, I don't think there's a tremendous amount of comfort for them in the time of this disaster. And so I would really like to think that music and movies and poems offer respite during breaks and when they get home, and something to give them to daydream about.
I'm interested in you talking a little bit about the effect of the art that you consume or that you observe or engage with on your own work.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
That's a great question. I do listen to a lot of music because it gives me a sense of hope of what's possible. Because thinking of not only, okay, whatever the composition is, but what the voices are doing, what the words are doing, how the person chooses to interpret the words, what can happen just in a few minutes' time, what can happen inside of one note, how we enter the song, how we leave it, what the breakdown section is. There are so many things that are possible with a voice, and so that sometimes I'll just listen to the same song over and over because I want to be able to achieve that. in a line, in a poem, if there's someone can really make a breath go, how can I push the line or extend it so that it would be kind of uncomfortable to read this, or it requires a lot of your eyes to kind of like fall off into the next line. And so, I think it has a pretty huge effect. And some of those songs are listed, the ones that are openly referenced are listed in the back of the second book, but there are so many that just exist on playlists, and the playlists are so bizarre. Like if you look at my Spotify, because I need different things for different pieces. And then definitely for movies and for photographs, because of what happens with sequencing and what you have to do to be able to make images make a kind of sense, taught me a lot about not only sequencing a book, but also how to move from image to image, how to move from poem to poem, and what belongs inside the world of a poem, how far you can push that, because sometimes things are going to be a little bit bizarre, the composition is going to be a bit off, it's going to be a bit skewed, and there are other times it's like, well, no, I need to crop all this stuff out and just stay exactly where I am. And so the same difficulties that I have to a degree, I would say, in photography or with filmmaking, I also have them in poetry, or maybe it's what the issues that I'm working through in poetry also show up in some of like the visual media. So I need a lot of help and expertise, to figure it out. And definitely with writers, people like Lucille Clifton, Toni Morrison, Jamaica Kincaid have had such a almost like total effect on my work that it's hard to even locate when something starts or ends. And it's because when I first heard those voices, when I first encountered that writing, I didn't even know I was hungry, that my ears were hungry for something until I saw it, or that my eyes were hungry for something. And so it's almost like, just as a human, you feel a harmony with the art that somebody else made, and then you have to make a separate choice as an artist. Like, it's like, well, these weird images and these like broken dolls and all this hair and all this water, that's what I'm concerned with. So what do I do with the things that I'm concerned with?
Well, that leads to my next question, which is a question that I know you've gotten many times. I've also gotten this question many times. But I think it might be helpful for the students at Baruch who are thinking about writing, or who are young writers themselves, young artists themselves. How did you come to poetry as a writer, and how did you know it was something that would be sustainable at any given time, like over the course of your artistic life? Like, why poetry? And I know that's not the only medium, the only genre that you work in. So how do we get to poetry? How did you get to poetry?
I just read a Maya Angelou poem when I was a kid. I think it's called When I Think About Myself. And I was like, what is this? How did this person put all this story and all these feelings and all this stuff just in this column, How is it possible to do something like that on a piece of paper, even though I'd encountered poems before and I'd heard them recited and even heard them sung, and that's such a big part of Somali culture. But I think, until I saw that, I didn't know that it was possible, or didn't have a sense of invitation, like maybe I can try that out. But then when you're a little kid, you're just, you're experimenting and you're learning. And so that was a way to also help me learn language and just be stronger with that, because English is my second language, and I definitely remember having, even if your speaking catches up, your writing can be super shaky, and so struggled with that. But so it's not that poetry felt more accessible; it felt more like I had so much I needed to do to be able to do it. And by the time I got there, I probably could read it better, I almost had this sense like if I wanted to be able to understand reading it, I needed to learn how to write it so that I could go back and then appreciate what I just read even more. And that turned out to be absolutely true for me, that the things that I loved in those materials, I could go back and appreciate in a way that I just couldn't have before that. And so I think, was just writing through school and, followed a path of assuming that I was going to keep studying literature, at least, as a minor or something. But even though, when we were in school together, I didn't feel very confident. And I really sometimes felt like I was floundering just as a person, but that didn't really see a place for my writing, was not really connecting with most people in workshop. And I think that I did tie that. I think that, that can come up a lot in institutions, and a lot of that is just sexism, it's xenophobia, a lot of it is racism, where it's not just knowledge of, I can definitely write better than this, and I know I'm making some very obvious mistakes, and I have a lot to learn, but it's also, well, should I be here at all? Should I be writing anything at all? Who even wants to read this? Who even cares about anything that I'm saying? And this insecurity too, of like, no matter how much I learn, I'm still going to be doing it wrong. There's a right way somehow to do things, and I'll never have access to that right way. Even if there's a right way for, some Black people, and for some specifically African people, I will always fall short. And I think that until, I was years out of grad school, I didn't know that pretty much everyone, and definitely like all the Black people I spoke to, had that exact same, even the people that I had really admired. Like, I would never think that you were ever, based on how I read your work and how you seemed, I would never think that you were uncomfortable, for example, or had a certain kind of difficulty. I just was like, Donika knows how to do things, and maybe one day I'll know how to do things. And so but that was, I think, good for me to just have a long discovery process, and to feel like I just had to figure it out myself, and to know, I just knew that there wasn't a certain kind of validation that was going to be available for me. And so I just had to learn. And I approached it in the same way that I approached, studying another language, or when I was studying philosophy. I was like, well, there are fundamentals that I need, and there's a lot of appreciation that I can grow, and I need to understand poetry in general in order to be able to make a poem. And for me, the study of poetry ended up, of course, being in literature and in poems specifically, in language and forms, but then also every other thing in life and art, and every study, including science, law, whatever, that felt like poetry, that had that thing of, it required more of me. I would classify almost all of that as poetry. I think even just person-to-person relationships. I think, the difficulty of looking at myself at the end of the day, and my avoidance of my own reflection in the mirror, there was also poetry available in that. And that was also, again, part of the scarring, for me, a lot of poetry has been freeing myself and undoing all the different ways that I was just telling myself to shut up, and because I had been told to shut up thousands of times in different kinds of ways. And so so that's a kind of maybe the learning path. And then I think professionally, I just was stubborn. I just wanted to keep doing it, and nobody, I was like, well, no one can take this from me, and maybe I can't get a book, or I can't get certain things, but I'm going to do it. And so after grad school has been a struggle. It's been a struggle financially. It's been a struggle psychologically, because it's almost like, so many of us have to, it feels like you're forcing away. There's so much disinvitation. But then at the same time, so many of us are in that together, and we are anyway building a community that's not formed around rejection, for example. It's formed around determination and just wanting to share, wanting to make something happen, wanting to connect with the reader. And so it, wasn't super straightforward. Definitely had to, rely on being a teaching artist for income. But I also wanted to do what I was happy to do and what would just help me be a more decent person. And for me, that was teaching and collaborating with people and being available to edit their work and things like that. And so it was just having a whole bunch of like part-time jobs cobbled together to make a living, and then a lot of times writing at night or trying to edit something on the train, and slowly putting things together like that, which sounds like a lot of people, a lot of poets in contemporary times in the U.S. That's how we've got to do things.
That's right.
So,
yeah. I think we probably have time for one more question. And again, I think this ties into everything that you've been talking about already, but it really, in your last response there, you talked about the importance of community, and for folks who are struggling to find like community in school or community in their borough, or how have you sort of fostered that community? How have you made that space?
So one, I think, is trusting and to just not be afraid, because I think, like, I would say even when we were in school, for example, even though you were obviously available and super nice, I felt like I had to do things and make something of myself before I could talk to people, if that makes any sense. Like, I needed to be, because I think a lot of people also were coming from more of a critical background, or had already had a master's, for example, before an MFA, or had maybe a more rigorous undergrad and professional life or something before they came into the program.
I had that feeling. Yeah, I had that feeling too, because I didn't have that. I came right out of undergrad. I was like, I don't know what anything is. And I was like, these people are very intimidating.
And so I think you assume, without even asking anybody, well, they're all like that, and I better do something with myself to get there too. So I think it's just trusting, right? And talking to people, and also looking outside of some of those primary circles, because I was able to form friendships with people that were writing fiction and doing screenwriting, and professors who are working in gender studies and who are working in, like theory and performance, and just sit with them and sometimes do independent studies with them. And that also really helped me. But then I think making yourself available for the things that could help to nourish the community, but also nourish yourself. And so continuing to mentor, continuing to do teaching artist work, continuing to just volunteer. And that's as simple as someone you don't know and someone that's outside of your circle asking you for help with a project or a little bit of advice, or they want to apply to go to grad school too, or they have some poems or, like a play that they're working on. And so that was also really enriching for me. That's, it can be a shaky experiment at times, because as you're doing that, you have to be able to trust yourself. And I think the insecurity that shows up with writing, it also shows up with community, at least for me, where I'm like, I can't teach anybody anything. I'm not going to probably be a good friend to people. Like, I should just stay over here somewhere, and then, there's that incredible loneliness, because you're waiting for something to happen, and are not broadcasting that even, people they're not going to know what you need until you speak for yourself or show that, or you reflect back to people, right? By showing up and giving them what they need, it indicates what you might need, right? As an artist or just a human in community. And so I'm glad that was in place, and that was, with both my parents being educators and having younger siblings, that was firmly in place. Like, every time I feel lost or really lonely, find a volunteer opportunity, look through and find an email that I haven't answered, who's a writer that's junior to me that needs something. And so when I was studying, that was, high school students and middle school students. And then it was eventually undergrad students. And then it was grad students or people applying to grad school, and then it was people who are trying to put their first book together. And so with each stage, you grow, and then your community grows with you. And a lot of that can be quiet work. Like, you can be a shy weirdo and not that good at showing up for face-to-face meetings or fumble over the phone, but really good at showing up for the things that people need in community when they write to you, for example, or are trying to build like a project timeline or something like that. And so it can also look a lot of ways, because I think I used to think, well, if I'm not like hanging around with people and like making have a cheese dip or something ready to share, like maybe I'm not that good at roller skating, like maybe there's only one way to be in the community, and that's outward and cool, and it's everybody taking a selfie together and being accepted. And there are actually lots of paths that are less clear but are always there, I would say.
This was really lovely, and I appreciate you making the time.
Of course, thank you.
I wish that things were different so that we could be in person, because I would give you a hug.
Yeah, well, I can do it through the screen. Thanks to the community too that's engaging with these poems and with this conversation. Sorry, we can't see y'all in real life, but sending you warmth from here.